At Thanksgiving dinner, my whole family laughed and called me a doormat because I never stand up for myself and always let people walk all over me. 2 weeks later, my dad called begging me to co-sign his business loan since I have perfect credit. I simply said, "Sorry, doormats don't sign legal papers," and hung up. His business collapsed and now they all say I'm vindictive and could have saved him. I was always that kid who just blended in. Even now, at 28, I still catch myself struggling to take up space. My name's Ethan, and I was always the nice one in our family. The peacekeeper, the conflict avoider, the one who'd agree to anything just to keep everyone comfortable. But nice, I learned, doesn't always equal respected. At least not in my family. This year's Thanksgiving dinner was the moment something in me finally cracked. They called me the doormat. Right to my face, at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of everyone. That one word, that cutting little insult, shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, and sparked a quiet war I never saw coming. The air in that dining room, thick with false cheer and simmering resentment, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I just sat there, smiling, trying to act like it was funny, but inside, a lifetime of being invisible was finally boiling over. See, I grew up in this big, loud, super opinionated family. I'm the youngest of three. My sister, Sophia, she's 35, and my brother, Daniel, is 32. My parents, Sarah and David, they were big on tough love. What that really meant was, if you weren't cheerfully obedient, you were weak. Mad? Dramatic? Sad? Ungrateful? Stand up for yourself? You were causing problems. So, naturally, I figured out pretty fast, just smile and nod. Every family has its roles, right? Sophia was the high achiever, always humble bragging about her consulting job, her 3 kids, her Pinterest-perfect house. Daniel was the charmer, which usually just translated to loud and manipulative. Always had some new hustle going, always crashing on someone's couch between business ideas. But somehow, he was still fun Uncle Daniel who just needs a break. And me? I was the helper. The one who'd drop everything to dog sit when Daniel had a last-minute emergency trip. The one who always remembered dessert for family dinners, even if no one bothered to ask. The one who lent money, no questions asked. Quiet, dependable Ethan. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house this year. I walked in with a pumpkin pie I'd baked from scratch. I'd been working 2 jobs, flat out, but I still wanted to contribute. Nobody even said thanks. My mom, Sarah, gave me this quick side hug and immediately asked, "Oh, did you bring whipped cream, too?" Not "Hi, how are you?" just topping anxiety. I shrugged it off, same as always. My disappointment threshold with them was pretty much in the stratosphere by then. We all sat down. Things started normally enough. Sophia was boasting about her oldest getting into the gifted program. Daniel was showing off some flashy mock-up for a crypto-adjacent app. I tried to chime in once, mentioned I'd finally paid off my student loans this month. Crickets. Just a quick pivot into how kids today are coddled. But it wasn't until after dinner that things really went sideways. We were in the living room, stuffed, a little buzzed. The conversation drifted to personality types. Sarah, my mom, had seen some video about enneagrams or whatever, and everyone started assigning roles. It started playfully. Sophia was the boss, obviously. Daniel, the visionary. My dad, David, the provider. My mom, the glue. Then Sophia looked right at me and said, "And Ethan's the doormat." I laughed. I actually thought she was joking. But she just smiled and added, "No, really, you are. You let people walk all over you. You never speak up, even when you should. It's like you don't even exist sometimes." Sarah didn't correct her. David didn't object. Daniel chuckled and said something like, "You're lucky, though, Ethan. Less stress when you don't take anything personally." I just sat there, frozen, trying to keep my face neutral. They kept talking, kept laughing, like it was all in good fun. But I could feel something inside me, cracking open. I'd let so much slide over the years. The comments, the jabs, being excluded from decisions, used for favors. But that word, doormat, it just stuck to my ribs like bad gravy. And the worst part? I couldn't even defend myself. I just smiled politely, like always, and muttered, "Guess I need a wash." They laughed. I went home early. For the next few days, it haunted me. I couldn't stop replaying every single moment I'd let someone push past my boundaries. Family, friends, even coworkers. All the times I'd said yes when every fiber of my being screamed no, how often I'd felt small, letting it happen because it was easier. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment and just made a list. A literal list of every single thing my family had asked of me in the last 5 years. It was long. Airport rides, co-signing leases, babysitting, covering hotel costs, helping Daniel with his website, helping Sophia move, giving David advice on his taxes. I'm an accountant, by the way. Not that they ever remembered what I actually did. I was angry, yes, but mostly, I was just exhausted. Tired of carrying a family that seemed to forget I even existed until they needed something from me. Then, exactly 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, David, my dad, called. "Hey, Ethan," he started, like nothing had happened. "Quick thing. You got a minute?" He had that tone, you know? The one where he's about to ask for something big, but wants to pretend it's just a casual catch-up. I played along, curious. Turns out his small logistics company, which had been shaky for years, was really struggling. They'd lost a major contract, needed a bridge loan to stay afloat, and had already been denied twice. His credit was shot. Sarah had co-signed something earlier in the year and couldn't help. Then came the ask. I need someone with solid credit to co-sign this next one. Just to show good faith. Bank says it'll really help the approval process. You've always been smart with money. I didn't respond right away. He took that as hesitation. Look, it's just paperwork. You don't actually have to do anything. I'll handle the payments. You won't even notice it's there. A flashback hit me, Thanksgiving. Sophia's smirk. You're the doormat. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just default to sure. I didn't offer to meet or ask how I could help. I just said, in the calmest voice I could manage, "Sorry, Dad. Doormats don't sign legal documents." He went silent. Completely silent for a few seconds. Then came the stammering. "Ethan, come on. Don't be like that. You know I didn't mean anything by that. That was just your sister messing around. She talks out of turn. We were just joking." "Yeah," I said. "Funny joke." He started getting defensive, saying things like, "This is family, Ethan. We help each other. That's what we do." But it didn't sound convincing. It sounded like desperation wrapped in entitlement. I told him I had to go, and I hung up. That was the first time I'd ever told any of them no. The first time I didn't cushion it with an apology or try to soften the blow. I just said no. And it felt terrifying and incredible. A few days later, Daniel texted something vague like, "Heard about the loan. Kind of cold, man." Sophia chimed in too, "Dad said you bailed on him. Thought you cared more than that." The irony. They still didn't understand what they'd done. What years of being overlooked and undervalued does to someone. They just saw my refusal as a betrayal. That was when I knew the dynamic had shifted. For the first time in my life, they were shocked by my behavior. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that I'd already started preparing for this moment, long before Thanksgiving. I'd been working quietly in the background, getting my own affairs in order, making moves they hadn't even noticed. And what came next? Well, let's just say the fallout from my no was bigger than even I expected. I didn't hear from David for a few days after I turned him down. No calls, no texts, just silence. It was oddly peaceful, like I'd stepped outside a storm I hadn't even realized I'd been standing in. For the first time, my phone wasn't lighting up with requests. No passive-aggressive texts from Sophia asking if I was free to help move some stuff. No late-night calls from Daniel begging for a quick loan or a ride because his car randomly died again. Just silence. And honestly, it felt good. But peace doesn't last long in my family. The silence finally broke 1 week later when I got a call from my mom, Sarah. She never calls me first. Usually, she has me call her to check in, or she group texts me with my siblings. But this time it was a direct call. I answered, curious. Her tone was sweet at first. Too sweet. Hi, honey. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Haven't heard from you in a bit. I wasn't about to let my guard down. I've been good, Mom. Just working. Small talk followed, but I could feel it coming. She was circling, warming me up. Finally, she dropped it. Your father's been really stressed. He's barely sleeping. He's working so hard to keep the company afloat. And now with the loan being declined again. I didn't say anything, just let her trail off. She continued, you know how much he's done for this family. It's hard seeing him like this. He's not getting any younger, Ethan. I sighed. Mom, I'm not co-signing. I already told him that. Her voice turned sharper. You're being selfish. That word hit me like a slap. Me selfish? You don't understand what this loan means. If the business folds, we lose everything. Your father's reputation, our retirement, your sister's kids' tuition. Then it hit me. We've all put something into this business over the years. All of them. Except me. I had never been asked, never even told what was going on. Yet now, I was expected to clean up the mess. So why didn't anyone ask me to be part of it when things were good? I asked. Why is it only now that you need a signature that I suddenly matter? She paused. A long silence. Then, you're overreacting. And that was the end of that conversation. The next day, I got a call from Sophia. I should have let it go to voicemail. I really should have. But I picked up. Hey, Ethan, she said breezily. So, I heard about the loan situation. Of course, she had. I'm not getting involved, I said flatly. Oh, I'm not calling about that, she lied. Well, not exactly. I just think you should know. Dad's talking about selling the northern Michigan cabin. That caught my attention. The cabin wasn't anything fancy. It was a small, aging place in northern Michigan that my grandfather had built in the 60s. We used to go there every summer growing up. No Wi-Fi, barely functioning plumbing, walls covered in old fishing rods and Polaroids, but it was ours. And when Grandpa passed, he left it to all three of us grandkids, me, Sophia, and Daniel, equally. But like everything else in our family, I'd always been the odd man out. Daniel had basically taken it over for years, throwing parties and claiming he did maintenance, though it was clear he just used it as his weekend hangout. Sophia had decorated one of the rooms as a kid's zone and treated it like her own vacation home. I rarely got a say. Why would Dad be selling the cabin? I asked. He doesn't even own it. She hesitated. Well, technically the title's still in his name. Grandpa left it to us in the will, but Dad never fully transferred the deed. You know how slow he is with paperwork. My stomach dropped. So, legally it's still his? Sort of. He always said it was ours. But yeah, on paper it's still under his name. And with the loan situation, well, the bank might require collateral. I couldn't believe it. After all these years of being sidelined and ignored, now they were planning to put up property that was supposed to be mine too, as collateral for a loan I'd already refused to support. I told her flat out, he can't use the cabin. It's not just his. That's not fair. And then came the kicker. Sophia laughed. Oh, Ethan, don't be so dramatic. You've barely even gone up there in the last few years. You don't even use the place. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just hung up. That night, I pulled out every file I had. The cabin, Grandpa's will, old emails, letters. Sure enough, my name was listed. The cabin was meant to be jointly owned, but legally, it was vulnerable. My dad could still try to leverage it unless someone challenged him. I booked a consultation with a real estate attorney the next morning. And that, it turns out, was the first real domino. Because what I learned from that meeting started unraveling a whole web I didn't even know existed. For starters, the cabin wasn't the only thing still under my dad's name. Several other assets, ones that Grandpa had left for the grandkids, had never been properly transferred. My siblings didn't care because they were allowed to use those assets freely. Daniel had been driving Grandpa's old Jeep for years. Sophia's kids used the inheritance money meant for education on summer camps and elite private schools. No one had questioned it because it all worked smoothly until now. And I'd been excluded. Not out of malice, maybe, but out of assumption. The assumption that I wouldn't rock the boat, that I'd just go along with whatever they decided. That was when I realized they didn't see me as family. They saw me as furniture. I started keeping a journal, not for emotional reasons, but to document everything. Dates, phone calls, quotes. Something inside me had shifted. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. A week later, Sarah hosted a Sunday dinner and invited me, which really meant she told me I was expected to come. I almost didn't go, but then I thought maybe it was time I saw them all face to face. When I got there, everyone was already seated. The atmosphere was weirdly cheerful. Daniel was cracking jokes. Sophia was showing off photos from some winter recital. My dad stood when he saw me and gave me a big, awkward pat on the back. Glad you could make it, son. I didn't smile. I just nodded and sat down. We made it halfway through dinner before the topic came up. It started with Daniel saying, "So, I hear the bank's final decision comes in tomorrow." He said it casually, like he was talking about sports scores. Then my mom chimed in. "We're optimistic, but it would be a lot easier if the family showed a united front." They were all looking at me. I cleared my throat. Is this the part where I'm guilted into saving the family? No one laughed. David leaned forward. Ethan, look. I know things have been tense. I know you feel underappreciated, and I take responsibility for that, but we're in crisis now. This isn't the time for grudges. I blinked. You mean this isn't the time for me to have boundaries? He opened his mouth, then shut it. Then, out of nowhere, Sophia snapped. You're seriously going to let pride ruin everything? Dad built that business for us. You've always been the least involved in the family, and now when we need you the most, you're suddenly high and mighty. Who even are you lately? I stared at her. Daniel added, Dude, you've always been soft. That's fine. It's who you are. But don't pretend like you're some big shot now. You owe Dad. We all do. I stood up slowly. You want to know who I am? I asked. Everyone fell silent. I'm the guy who fixed your credit, Daniel, when you tanked at trying to launch a vape business in 2019. I'm the guy who watched your kids for free every weekend last summer, Sophia, because your husband was too busy. I'm the guy who filed mom's taxes 4 years in a row without a thank you, and the guy who's been ignored, dismissed, and laughed at every time I tried to be more than just the family's background character. No one said a word. I looked directly at my dad, and I'm the guy who's done being used. I grabbed my coat. David called out, "Ethan, don't do this." I turned back, "You already did." And I walked out. But I wasn't finished yet. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anger, but because for the first time in years, I felt awake. Raw, exposed. My heart was pounding with everything I hadn't said over the years. Everything I'd swallowed just to keep the peace. That dinner, the way they cornered me, the words they threw around like my boundaries were just inconvenient. It finally confirmed what I'd always feared but never wanted to admit: they didn't love me. They loved the usefulness of me. And now that I'd removed that usefulness, I was nothing more than a problem. Still, as satisfying as that moment at dinner had been, walking out didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the ache. The part of me that still wanted to be seen, included, respected, that part was still very much alive. And now it was bruised and angry. I spent the next week in a daze. I'd show up to work, run the numbers, do my job, and come home to sit on the couch and stare at nothing. My apartment was quiet, borderline depressing. I hadn't decorated it in years, just the bare essentials. The same IKEA couch I'd bought out of college, dishes in the sink, no photos on the walls. I'd spent so long putting everyone else first, I didn't even know what my life looked like without them in it. And then came the email that finally broke me. It was from the bank. Somehow, despite everything, my dad had submitted a new loan application and had listed the Northern Michigan cabin as collateral. Even though I'd said no, even though I'd warned Sophia, even though I had spoken up. I called the bank directly. At first, they refused to disclose anything, standard procedure. But once I provided the documentation from my grandfather's will, along with proof that the cabin was meant to be divided between 3 parties, the tone shifted. The loan was still under review, but now it was flagged as disputed property. Still, I was shaking. The idea that my father, after everything, would just go ahead and use the cabin anyway, that was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was betrayal. Legal, deliberate betrayal. I broke down completely. I'm not proud of it. But that night, I curled up in bed and cried until I couldn't breathe. Years of being walked on, laughed at, dismissed, used, it all came crashing down. And the worst part? I couldn't even bring myself to tell anyone. I had no close circle, no best friend I could vent to. My whole life had revolved around being the dependable one, the background support, the emotional sponge. And now I was empty. But hitting rock bottom has a strange way of clearing the fog. The next morning, I got up early, shaved, cleaned the entire apartment top to bottom. I threw away the takeout boxes, dusted off the bookshelf, changed my sheets, opened the windows. I stood in the center of my living room and looked around. For the first time in years, it felt like my space. Then I sat down and made a plan. I had spent nearly a decade in accounting, but always working for others, small firms mostly, helping people with taxes, reconciling books, cleaning up messes. I'd gotten so good at solving other people's problems that I'd never considered solving my own. But now things were different. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Every skill I had, every certification, every connection. Then I wrote a question at the top of a fresh page: what would I do if I didn't have to be anyone's crutch? The answer came quickly. I'd start my own practice. Quietly. On my terms. I'd always dreamed of it, a solo firm specializing in helping freelancers and small businesses manage their finances. No big corporate nonsense, no flashy branding, just clean, honest work. But I never dared because deep down I never believed I was capable of being the main character in my own life. Now I was done being a sidekick. I spent the next 2 months building it out. Nights, weekends, lunch breaks, any free time I had. I watched tutorials, designed a basic website, set up an LLC, and filed all the right paperwork. I built a pricing structure, researched competitors, and created templates for onboarding clients. Slowly, I began networking in local forums, joining business Facebook groups, offering free advice on Reddit to establish credibility. I picked up my first client in late January, a self-employed graphic designer who needed help untangling a tax mess. I charged less than I should have, but it was a start. Then came another, a yoga studio owner with 3 years of back taxes, then a tattoo artist, then a food truck owner. They weren't huge jobs, but they were mine. And with every email, every invoice, every client thank you, something in me healed. Every moment I spent working on this business reminded me that I could take up space. I could say no. I could build something without permission. I didn't need to ask my family to see me. I could see myself. I kept it all under wraps, no family mentions, no announcements. I stopped responding to the group chat entirely. After the cabin incident, I had expected a storm. Angry messages, calls, threats. But instead, they went quiet. Not out of respect, but dismissal. It was like they had silently agreed to freeze me out, as if I was being punished for not falling in line. That's when I realized I was finally free. But the final push, the moment that truly solidified the rise, came in mid-March when I got a call from someone I never expected, my grandfather's old lawyer. Then he said, "I'm reaching out because I found something in your grandfather's files." I was reviewing some estate documents and I realized there's a letter addressed to you. It looks like it was never delivered. He said he could mail it or I could pick it up in person. I drove there the next day. The law office was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. Mr. Reed, the lawyer, handed me the envelope, old, yellowed, but sealed on the front in my grandfather's handwriting, "To Ethan, for when you're ready." I opened it right there in the office. It wasn't long, just a page and a half, but every word hit me like a brick. He wrote about how he'd always seen how I was treated, how he noticed the way I got talked over at family dinners, how my siblings took without thanks, how I always gave in to keep the peace. He wrote that he admired my kindness, but he hoped I'd learned that kindness doesn't mean erasing yourself. And then he wrote this: "The world will always take from you, Ethan, if you never learn to hold the line. But you don't need to become loud to be strong. You just need to be willing to walk away when they stop listening." I cried in my car for a long time after that. It felt like someone had seen me all along. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the weak one. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be weaker so they could feel strong. That was the day I made the final decision. I wasn't going to just rebuild my life. I was going to protect it. I opened a separate business account, finalized contracts with 5 new clients, and reached out to a property lawyer about the cabin. If they wanted to play legal games, I was done being passive. I had a legal right to that property, and I was going to assert it. I even started looking into therapy, something I'd always dismissed before as unnecessary. But now I realized I had work to do. Internal work. Unpacking years of feeling small, learning how to speak, even when my voice shook. And bit by bit, I started to feel real, solid, not just a placeholder in someone else's story. And as I quietly rose, something strange began to happen. My siblings started to notice. It started with Daniel. He left me a voicemail. Awkward, half apologetic. Something about needing help with an LLC filing for a friend. I didn't respond. Then Sophia sent an email. Short and cold. "Dad said you've been making waves. Hope you're not trying to split up the cabin over some petty drama." I replied with one sentence. "I'm asserting my legal rights. Same as you would if it were reversed." She didn't reply, but my dad, David, hadn't reached out at all, which honestly said everything I needed to know. What they didn't know, what none of them yet understood, was that I had something else planned. Something not petty, not emotional, but strategic, thought out, calculated. Because while they were busy calling me selfish, I was building leverage. And soon, I was going to use it. When I was younger, I used to believe that revenge was loud. Yelling matches, storming out, breaking plates, that sort of thing. But as I sat at my desk that April morning, sipping black coffee and reviewing the final drafts of my property dispute claim, I realized something far more satisfying. Real revenge is quiet, strategic, measured. It doesn't need fireworks, just leverage. And I had plenty. It started with the cabin. After confirming with the real estate attorney that my grandfather's will clearly outlined joint inheritance, even if the deed hadn't been updated, I officially filed a petition to partition the property. In layman's terms, that meant forcing the cabin to be either legally divided or sold with the proceeds split among the rightful heirs. The best part? I didn't tell them. I knew my dad would find out soon enough. The moment he got served, probably. And when he did, he'd realize he couldn't use the cabin as collateral anymore. Not unless I agreed to it, which I wouldn't. Not now, not ever. But that was just the beginning. Over the past few months, while building my business and slowly untangling the knots of codependency, I'd also been digging through years of financial records. My family, for all their self-righteous posturing, had left a messy paper trail. For example, remember how Sophia's kids got into those elite private schools? Turns out part of the tuition was paid through an education fund my grandfather had set up for all his grandchildren. It was supposed to be split 3 ways, but based on the withdrawals I traced from the fund statements, nearly 90% of it had been used for her kids alone. I printed out the records, highlighted the numbers, made copies. I also pulled documentation from the time I'd lent Daniel $2,000, money he never paid back, and dug up emails showing I'd helped him clean up his credit, co-sign on a short-term apartment lease, and even transfer a car title into his name after some shady situation involving parking tickets. I had emails, texts, even a Venmo note labeled loan. Please pay back again. I printed everything, not to confront them with yet, but to prepare. I wanted my own little arsenal of truth. Facts they couldn't spin. Evidence they couldn't dance around. I was tired of their games. But the real turning point came when I decided to take a closer look at my dad's business. The very one he'd begged me to co-sign a loan for. Thanks to public records and some clever use of LinkedIn and business directories, I found out that not only had his company been hemorrhaging money for years, but they'd also been taking out short-term, high-interest loans just to keep payroll afloat. Worse, one of the business's side ventures, a logistics software platform he had sunk tens of thousands into, was partially funded by family investment. Only no one had ever asked me to invest. So, where did the money come from? That's when I found it. A quiet little transaction from 3 years ago, labeled as a family emergency withdrawal from a mutual fund that had my name attached to it. One my grandfather had set up in my name when I was a teenager. I'd never touched it. I didn't even remember it existed, but there it was, emptied in a single transfer. Gone. I stared at the screen for a long time. They'd taken my money without telling me, without asking, without even pretending to include me. I remember standing up, pacing my apartment, trying to breathe through the rush of heat flooding my chest. For all the things they'd called me, for all the times they'd laughed behind my back, dismissed me, treated me like a doormat, they hadn't even seen me as human enough to deserve a heads up before stealing from me. That was when my plan solidified. It wasn't going to be about getting even. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or dramatic family showdowns. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to be done. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. So, I did what I do best. I made a list. Step 1, petition the cabin. Already in motion. Once the court approved it, the family would either have to buy out my share or sell the property altogether. Either way, I'd finally get what was mine and they'd have no leverage left. Step 2. File a complaint regarding the mismanagement of the education fund. I wasn't planning to sue anyone, but a formal complaint through the proper channels, the bank that managed the fund, would trigger an audit. And once that audit showed the imbalance, Sophia would either have to repay what she'd used or risk legal scrutiny. Step 3. Confront my father privately and with evidence about the stolen mutual fund. I didn't want the money back. It was long gone. But I wanted acknowledgement. And more importantly, I wanted to make it clear that if he ever used my name or assets again without permission, I'd go public. Quietly, legally. And I had every piece of proof I needed to burn that bridge completely if he forced my hand. Step 4. Protect my future. This part was more personal. I updated my legal documents, will, power of attorney, everything. I removed all family members from emergency contact forms. I added a clause to my business stating that no familial financial involvement would ever be accepted without dual written consent. Then I got a new phone number. I didn't delete my old one, but I turned off the ringer, put it on silent. Any call from family went straight to voicemail where they were greeted with a new message. Hi, this is Ethan. If you're calling regarding personal matters, please email me instead. If this is family and you're calling about money, I'm not available. It was petty, and it was perfect. I told no one about my moves. Not even the lawyer I worked with knew the full picture. I kept it all airtight, meticulous, professional. Because the goal wasn't to destroy them. It was to detach fully, cleanly, and in a way they couldn't twist into Ethan being dramatic or Ethan overreacting. The beauty of it all was that I didn't have to do anything dramatic. The systems would do it for me. The legal filings, the audits, the emails, the quiet pressure of paperwork. And while all of that was moving behind the scenes, I kept building my business. By May, I had over 20 regular clients. I'd upgraded my office space, just a small co-working suite, but it felt like a throne. I replaced my worn-out couch, hung framed art on my walls, took a solo trip to Colorado, hiked, took photos, smiled for real in a selfie for the first time in years. I was living, not waiting to be useful, not hoping to be liked, just living. And then, just as I was beginning to feel settled, the text started up again. This time, it was Sophia, then Daniel, then my mom. Vague at first, then increasingly frantic. Sophia, you need to call Dad. It's urgent. Daniel, dude, what are you doing? You're tearing the family apart. Sarah, Ethan, please. This has gone too far. Don't do this. I didn't respond because they still didn't get it. I wasn't doing anything to them. I was simply refusing to be the cushion that made their bad decisions feel soft. But I'll admit, part of me wondered what exactly had triggered the panic. I didn't have to wonder for long. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Legal documents. My father's business, his entire company, had gone into receivership. The bank, denied the final loan, had begun the process of liquidating assets. And one of the assets attempted to be pledged as collateral, the cabin, had been frozen in a legal dispute, my dispute. That meant the bank couldn't use it to cover losses, which meant they were coming after my dad's personal assets now. And suddenly, the man who had looked me in the eye and said, "You're being selfish," was now facing the financial consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. And I wasn't done yet because the final piece of my plan? Well, it was almost time to put that into motion. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Thick, cream-colored envelope, no return address, handwritten in calligraphy ink, just my name, Ethan Jameson. It was from my father. I set it on the counter and walked away. Made coffee, fed the neighbor's cat who decided my porch was his second home. Then, with the mug warm in my hand, I opened it. For pages, neatly written, no greeting, no dear son, just his voice, formal and strange, as if he were addressing a business associate, not the child he once tucked into bed. The first half was a defense, of course. A long-winded justification about how he was under pressure, how he thought I'd understand, how he'd always provided for the family, and that this business, his legacy, was supposed to be for us. How disappointed he was that I'd chosen paperwork over people. That phrase stuck with me. The second half turned ugly. He accused me of betrayal. Said I'd embarrassed him. Said I'd crippled the family by forcing legal action over the cabin, that I'd turned my back on blood for pride, that I would regret this one day. And at the bottom of the last page, a postscript: "You were never built for this kind of life, Ethan. You're not ruthless enough, but I guess you learned a few tricks after all." I folded the letter in half and slid it into a drawer. That night, I hosted dinner in my new apartment. Nothing fancy, just a few friends I'd made through the small business community. People who laughed without condescension. People who listened as they ate lasagna and told stories about nightmare clients and weird tax loopholes. I felt something I hadn't in years: contentment. But let me back up one more time, because the final stage of all this, the real revenge, wasn't just about property or bank accounts or even legal filings. It was about ownership of my story, my voice, my past. A few days after receiving that letter, I published a blog post, just a personal piece on my business website titled "Why I Said No." I didn't name names. I didn't rant. I just told the truth about growing up quiet, about being useful but invisible. About the pressure of being the family fixer, and about how sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. The post blew up. Not viral, but close. It got shared in accounting forums, small business networks, even a few family therapy groups. Clients emailed me to say they related. One woman cried during a Zoom call and said she finally had the courage to tell her brother she wouldn't co-sign his mortgage. And then the emails started coming from my own extended family, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Carol from Colorado, even my mom's estranged brother, Uncle Thomas, they all said the same thing: "We knew how they treated you. We just didn't know what to say." Uncle Thomas added, "Your grandfather would have been proud." Meanwhile, the legal gears kept turning. The bank officially foreclosed on my father's business in early June. The warehouse, trucks, and inventory were auctioned. The software platform was sold for pennies. My mother moved out of their 4-bedroom home into a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. I heard this not from them, but from a mutual family friend who still occasionally checked in. The cabin? The court approved the petition. When my siblings learned they'd have to either buy out my 1/3 share or agree to sell, they panicked. Sophia begged me for a private agreement, offered to make things right if I withdrew the court case. I told her calmly, "We're past that point." Daniel, of course, sent a flurry of texts trying to guilt me, accusing me of breaking up the last thing we had from Grandpa. I didn't reply. The cabin was listed that fall. It sold to a retired couple who planned to fix it up and rent it seasonally. I made sure they knew the history, handed them a small envelope of old Polaroids I'd rescued from the dusty drawers before the sale. "He built this place himself," I told them, "every nail." The wife teared up. Her husband shook my hand and promised to take good care of it. My share of the sale came to just over $180,000. I used part of it to open a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name for young accountants from underserved communities. The rest went into expanding my practice. I hired an assistant, rented a bigger office, and created a mentorship program for freelancers who wanted to understand finances without being intimidated. As for my father, he reached out again one last time about 6 months after the business folded. Another letter, this one shorter. Still no apology. Just, "You made your point. I hope you're happy. Just remember who fed you, who clothed you, who gave you everything. Family doesn't owe each other. They support each other." I read it once, then fed it to the shredder. Because here's the thing. I was happy. Not in the gloating, victorious, I got mine kind of way, but in the quiet, steady kind of way that comes from walking away from chaos and realizing the silence is beautiful, peaceful. I never wanted to destroy my family. I just wanted to be seen, heard, respected. But when that didn't happen, I did what they never expected me to do. I stood up. I stepped out. And I made a life of my own. I don't think they'll ever really understand what they lost. The value of a quiet son who would have done anything for them if they'd only treated him like he mattered. But that's okay because I no longer need their understanding, and I no longer need their permission. I am no longer the doormat, and I don't answer the door anymore. What would you have done in my shoes?